Hello friends, welcome to this channel. Today, we're going to share an inspiring story about a priest in his 40s who found light in his life after meeting an elderly Muslim imam and learning the Quran. So make sure you watch until the end, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss other inspiring stories on this channel. A 40-year-old priest walked alone on a long afternoon. His robe fluttered softly in the wind, while his mind was filled with the restlessness he had carried for years. He was known in his community as a wise figure, yet in his heart there was an empty space he could not explain to anyone. One day, while traveling in search of peace, he saw an elderly Muslim imam sitting under a large tree. The imam looked calm, his face radiating a serenity that was difficult to put into words. The priest felt drawn to him, and without realizing it, his steps brought him closer. The old imam then looked at him with a warm smile, as if he already knew that the guest approaching was carrying a heavy burden in his chest. They began to talk, at first lightly, merely about their journeys and the passing of age. But gradually, their conversation turned into a deep dialogue about the purpose of life, the meaning of tranquility, and the essence of worship. The priest was surprised. All this time he had been known as a teacher, not a seeker. Yet now he felt as though he were sitting as a student, listening to someone who did not preach, but radiated truth through the gentleness of his conduct. The imam did not try to convince him, nor did he try to invite him. He simply explained whatever was asked, with soft language and boundless compassion. The next day, the priest returned, and again the day after that, until eventually he asked to learn more deeply about the teachings of Islam. The old imam welcomed him without conditions. They sat together every morning, discussing the oneness of God, the Holy Scripture, and the journeys of the prophets. When the old imam began teaching him to read verses of the Quran, the priest felt something he had never experienced before. Every letter he pronounced seemed to pierce into his soul. He silently wept, feeling the peace he had long sought but never found. Day by day, the changes within him became more apparent. He felt more humble, more tranquil, and closer to the truth he sensed deep within his heart. Until one night, as he reflected on the long journey he had taken, he felt a strong conviction arise within him. He went to the old imam the next morning. In the imam's eyes, he saw relief, as though the imam had been waiting for that moment without ever needing to ask. He went to the old imam the next morning. In the imam's eyes, he saw a sense of relief, as though the imam had been waiting for that moment without ever needing to ask. And from that day on, their relationship changed from mere casual conversation into a profound spiritual journey. The priest, who was now slowly leaving his old identity behind, began to come every day. He arrived earlier than usual, as if afraid to lose even a single second that he could use to gain knowledge. The old imam always welcomed him with the same smile, a smile that never changed, as though the smile itself was part of the lesson on calmness and trust in God. In the beginning, the priest still stuttered when reading verses of the Quran. The old imam taught him patiently, correcting each letter and articulation. Though it was difficult, he kept repeating it. Sometimes he covered his face in embarrassment, feeling he had begun all of this far too late. But the old imam would say in a gentle voice, "Every step toward truth is never too late. The only ones who are late are those who stop seeking." Those words always strengthened him. The days that followed became a new routine. They read, discussed, reflected on the meanings of the verses, and at times shared silence when words were no longer needed. Their silence was not empty, but full of understanding. One afternoon, the old imam invited him to walk to a small hill not far from where they usually sat. From its peak, a vast stretch of land could be seen, illuminated by sunlight. The old imam said, "In this world, people often feel small, but if they are able to see truth with their hearts, they will realize that God's light can reach all of life, no matter how dark someone's past may be." The priest nodded. Those words struck deeply within him. As the days passed, changes in his demeanor became more evident. He had once often been anxious, overthinking, and forcing answers to questions he could never resolve. Now he was calmer, more accepting, and more willing to understand that not everything could be grasped at once. Some things must be learned slowly, like someone learning to read the divine verses for the first time. Every evening at dusk, he went home with a different heart. His house felt more peaceful even though nothing inside had changed. What had changed was himself. He began waking earlier, began praying in the way he learned from the old imam, and began emptying his heart of the noise that once filled his mind. One day he said to the old imam, "When I first met you, I felt lost, but now I feel as though I am returning to the place I was always meant to reach." The old imam simply smiled, as if those words were not a compliment to him, but an awareness that should naturally arise within someone seeking truth. Weeks passed. The priest's knowledge of Islam grew deeper. He began to understand patience not as forced endurance, but as trust that God's timing is never wrong. He began to understand gratitude not as repeated words, but as a way of living humbly. He also learned about the struggles of the prophets, their patience in facing rejection, their steadfastness despite being tested over and over. And among all those lessons, the one he pondered most often was sincerity. He realized that the journey toward truth was not only about knowledge, but also about a heart willing to change. The old imam saw these changes with a pride he never showed excessively. He simply continued guiding, teaching, and sometimes gently reminding his new student whenever he became too hasty in understanding something. And although the priest no longer wore his old garments, he still kept the robe at home, not as a memory he wished to return to, but as a reminder of the long journey that brought him to this place. Every time he saw the robe hanging in the corner of the room, he remembered one thing, that human beings can never know where they will find light. Sometimes that light comes in the form of an old imam sitting beneath a tree, waiting without ever forcing, teaching without demanding, and showing the way without ever claiming to be the only one who is right. The journey is not over, and the former priest felt this clearly. He knew that every day with the old imam was another doorway to a new chapter of his life. Today, as usual, he walked toward their meeting place. But in his heart, he sensed that something different was waiting to be discovered. And he stepped forward with full conviction that whatever awaited him was part of the plan that had always guided his steps toward the light. A few days after the former priest grew more certain in his new conviction, the old imam looked at him gently and said that it was time for him to become familiar with the environment where a Muslim learns and worships. The priest nodded, though he could not hide a slight nervousness. On a bright morning, the old imam took him for a walk to a mosque that was not very large, yet felt very alive. From a distance, the soft voices of people reciting Quranic verses could be heard. That sound made the priest's steps grow heavier, not out of reluctance, but from an emotion he could not explain. As they entered the mosque courtyard, several Muslim men who were sweeping and arranging sandals immediately approached the old imam with deep respect. The imam smiled and signaled for them to come closer. Then calmly, he introduced the priest as a new brother who was learning about Islam. The Muslim men welcomed him with sincere smiles and warm handshakes. No one asked about his past, no one looked at him with suspicion. They accepted his presence like welcoming a brother returning from a long journey. The priest could hardly contain the emotion pressing against his chest. He had never felt welcomed so deeply. The old imam then invited him inside the mosque. Sunlight entered through small windows, illuminating the carpet that still held its clean scent. In one corner, a few men sat in a small circle reciting the Quran. Their recitation flowed gently like clear water. The old imam invited him to sit beside him. He took a small mushaf and opened it to the page he had prepared. "We start from here today." Though the old imam did not use quotation marks, his voice still felt warm in the priest's heart. The other Muslim men also sat nearby not to watch him, but to accompany him. They wanted to be part of their new brother's journey. The former priest began reading slowly. His voice was still broken, his pronunciation imperfect, but no one laughed. Whenever he made a mistake, the old imam corrected him gently, and one of the men around him would demonstrate the correct pronunciation in a soft voice. Letter by letter, verse by verse, he learned. Gradually, the mosque felt like a space that held all the searching he had done throughout his life. There, he did not feel like a former priest. He simply felt like a human being approaching God with all the imperfections he carried. When he successfully read a verse correctly for the first time, the men around him smiled, and a few patted his shoulder proudly. The old imam said in a soothing voice, "Knowledge is light, and today you have kindled the first light in your new journey." The priest lowered his head as tears began to flow. Tears he could not hold back. Not tears of sadness, but tears of gratitude that had never before found a place to grow. That day became the beginning of many more to come, when he returned to the mosque to learn the Quran with the Muslim men who had now become his family. They taught him patiently, guided him through the difficult letters, and encouraged him to keep going even when he doubted himself. The mosque became his new home, a place where he grew, learned, and drew closer to the light he once sought only in silent prayers. Now the light was right before him among brothers who loved him, under the guidance of the old imam who never tired of showing the way with wisdom and sincerity. A few weeks after the former priest began regularly coming to the mosque to study, the changes within him became even more evident. Each day he read the Quran little by little, learning its meanings with the old imam and the Muslim men who always welcomed him as a brother. One calm morning, when the sunlight had just touched the mosque's dome, the old imam called him to sit beside him. The mosque was still quiet, the only sound being the wind entering through the cracks of the door. The Muslim men who usually studied with them began to arrive one by one until the small room felt warm with their presence. The old imam looked at him gently, as though he had noticed something in the former priest's face, something different from usual. There was a new calmness, a certainty no longer clouded by doubt. The former priest lowered his gaze for a moment, then said softly but firmly that he felt he had found what had long been missing from his life. He said that his heart had accepted the light he had sought endlessly. The old imam nodded slowly. He did not force him, did not pressure him. He simply ensured that the decision was born from an honest and free heart. After the former priest expressed his conviction with full awareness, the old imam asked him to stand among the Muslim men who had gathered around him with faces full of joy. In the middle of that circle, beneath the peaceful ceiling of the mosque, the old imam guided him in reciting the words that would mark the beginning of his new journey. His voice trembled slightly, not out of doubt, but from the emotion filling his chest. He followed each word spoken by the imam with a heart full of sincerity. The Muslim men around him listened with reverence. There were no cheers, no exaggerated applause, only a warm atmosphere filled with gratitude that someone had found the path he had consciously chosen. Once he finished reciting the words, the old imam gently patted his shoulder. The Muslim men took turns embracing him, offering congratulations in a simple yet heartfelt way. He felt a brotherhood he had never experienced before, as though he had returned from a long journey and was now welcomed into a home that had been waiting for him all along. Tears fell freely, and this time he did not hide them. He let them flow as a sign that his heart had opened a new chapter. The old imam then invited him to sit again. Together with the other Muslim men, they recited several Quranic verses as a prayer and expression of gratitude. Their voices echoed softly through the room, wrapping the former priest in a serenity he found difficult to describe. The mosque that had once been merely a place of learning had now become the place where he began a new life. It was there that he chose his path, there that he spoke his conviction, and there that he felt his years of searching had finally reached a beautiful end. From that day on, he no longer came as a priest seeking answers. He came as a Muslim eager to keep learning, to keep improving himself, and to keep walking the path he had chosen with a heart filled with light. After the day he recited the Shahada inside the mosque, the former priest's life entered a new chapter, one far deeper and filled with meaning. He no longer came as someone searching for direction, but as a Muslim who wished to strengthen his knowledge with sincere intention. The old imam understood this change and welcomed each of his steps with the same patience as before. Every morning before sunrise, the former priest was already in the mosque courtyard. He waited for the old imam, who always arrived with calm steps, carrying the old staff that had witnessed the journey of his life. When the imam arrived, they greeted each other with peace, then sat in the quietest corner of the mosque. There their study session began. The old imam did not only teach him Quranic recitation, but also explained the meanings, wisdom, and reasons behind each verse. The former priest listened attentively. He wrote every important point in a small notebook, though the old imam often reminded him that knowledge should not only be written on paper, but also planted in the heart. They discussed faith, worship, character, patience, gratitude, and how a Muslim should view life and the trials that come one after another. The old imam taught him that knowledge was not merely insight, but a provision for living life with wisdom. The former priest studied Quranic recitation diligently. Sounds of letters that once felt foreign gradually became part of his daily life. He repeated each verse until his tongue became more fluent, and each time he managed to read a verse correctly, the old imam smiled proudly, as if witnessing the growing strength of the light within his new student. Aside from the Quran, the old imam also taught him the correct manner of performing prayer. At first, his movements were stiff, his recitation imperfect, but he performed them earnestly. He even came earlier during prayer times so he could practice what he had learned. The Muslim men in the mosque also helped guide him with kindness. One afternoon, the old imam invited him to walk outside the mosque. They sat under the tree where they first met. The old imam said softly, "After someone finds the path of truth, what matters is not how fast he walks, but how steadfastly he steps." The former priest nodded. Those words made him realize even more that this journey had no end. It was a lifelong path. In the days that followed, he began helping the old imam care for the mosque. He swept the courtyard, arranged the shelves of books, even helped teach small children the most basic Quranic letters. The children liked him. They called him their new brother, and he responded with a warm smile. The old imam watched all of this with eyes full of happiness. For him, the former priest's transformation came not only from knowledge, but also from a heart that had softened and surrendered to the truth. The former priest never forgot his past, but he was no longer burdened by it. Now his past was merely a trail that had led him to the place where he finally found peace. The knowledge he learned from the old imam did not just expand his understanding. It shaped him into someone more humble, more compassionate, and closer to God. And every day, as he stood beside the old imam reciting Quranic verses, he felt as though the light he once saw only from afar was now illuminating every step of his life. The journey continued still, and he walked it with certainty, accompanied by the old imam, who had become his teacher, his companion, and his guide on the path toward a life of deeper and greater truth. Time passed slowly, yet the transformation within the former priest grew ever greater. He was no longer just a diligent student, but someone who rarely left the old imam's side. Every day they sat together, reading verses from the Quran, discussing the meanings of life, and sharing the tranquility that arose from wisdom and sincerity. But the old imam was aging. His steps grew heavier, his breath shorter, and his voice no longer carried its former strength. Yet he still smiled whenever he saw his new student arrive with a mushaf. As if his spirit were renewed each time, he witnessed the determination growing within the one who had once come to him as a restless priest. One morning, the former priest arrived earlier than usual. He sat in the mosque corner, waiting for the imam as usual. The sun rose slowly, but the old imam did not appear not like before. A sense of unease settled in his chest. He quickly left the mosque and walked to the small house where the old imam lived. The house was simple, surrounded by plants tended with loving, aged hands. When he knocked, a Muslim man who often assisted the imam opened the door, his face heavy with sorrow. Without many words, the man led him inside. There he saw the old imam lying on the bed. His face was serene, his body covered with a thin blanket, and beside him lay the mushaf he had read every day. The old imam looked like someone sleeping peacefully, but the former priest soon realized the truth, and it struck his heart with a weight he could not bear. The old imam had returned to God the night before. The former priest fell silent. His steps felt heavy, as though the earth itself were pulling all his strength. He approached and sat beside the teacher who had opened the door to light for him. Unconsciously, tears fell. Not loud sobs, but slow, quiet tears carrying both profound loss and deep gratitude. He held the old imam's hand, now cold. In his heart, he whispered that without this elder's guidance, he might still be walking in darkness. His voice trembled as he said softly, "You have changed my life. May God bless you as you have blessed me on my journey to truth." Other Muslim men began arriving. They brought burial shrouds, holy water, and all that was needed to wash the old imam's body. The former priest asked for permission to help, though he feared his emotions might overwhelm him. They nodded, allowing him to assist as a final mark of respect. He helped wash the old imam, cleansing the body that had long supported so many souls. He did it carefully and reverently, recalling all the gentle words, sincere smiles, and advice that had never forced him but always guided him. The funeral was simple, yet filled with love. The mosque was crowded with those who had been taught, guided, or merely touched by the imam's wisdom. Every face showed sorrow, yet also gratitude for having known him. When the final soil was laid, the former priest stood for a long while in front of his teacher's grave. He said nothing. He simply closed his eyes and absorbed the silence, a quiet similar to the peace he had always felt sitting beside the old imam. The following days felt different. The mosque was quiet without the imam's slow footsteps. The small chair where he had always sat was now empty, and every time the former priest looked at it, his chest felt warm and yet heavy with pain. But he knew this journey would not stop. The old imam had gone, but the knowledge he had sown remained alive. The former priest continued what the imam had taught. He taught children to read the letters of the Quran, guided the men who came to study, and ensured that the mosque remained a home where light touched the hearts of all who sought it. Every time he opened a mushaf, he remembered the imam's gentle, wise voice. He no longer felt alone, for he knew the teacher had never truly gone. He lived on in the verses they had read together, in the morals he had instilled, and in every step of his student, who now stood as the heir to that light. Years passed since the death of the old imam. The former priest, now a true Muslim, lived with the simplicity and sincerity his teacher had instilled in him. The mosque remained his place of activity, teaching children, guiding new Muslim men, and continuing to study the Quran with a heart always eager to grow. He was now approaching 50. His body had aged, his steps no longer as strong as before, yet his spirit remained alive. Every morning he came to the mosque, reading Quranic verses, recalling the guidance of the old imam, and feeling the warmth of the brotherhood he had built himself. His life was simple, never seeking luxury, for he believed that true wealth lay in inner peace and closeness to God. One night, after performing the tahajjud prayer and reading several juz of the Quran, he sat in the corner of the mosque that the old imam had always occupied. He gazed at the mosque ceiling, letting the silence of the night soothe his mind. He felt a profound peace, as if his entire life journey had reached its perfect point. The next morning, as the sun began to shine through the mosque windows, he was found sitting peacefully in his small chair, the mushaf resting in his lap. His face carried a gentle, serene smile, as though in deep sleep. He had passed away as a Muslim, carrying a heart full of faith and tranquility. News of his death spread, and the Muslim men who had once studied with him came to surround the mosque. They wept, remembering the figure who had guided them with patience and exemplary conduct. Yet behind the sorrow, there was gratitude. They knew that the priest who had once been lost had now returned to the Creator in the most noble state, as a devoted servant. His grave was simple, surrounded by clean earth and a few small trees planted in his memory. Those he had guided often came to pray, recall his teachings, and emulate the patience and sincerity he had shown throughout his life. The mosque remained standing as a witness to his life journey. In every recitation of the Quran, in every prayer uttered by those who came to learn, his footsteps could be felt. A life that had begun in searching, then found the light, and finally returned to the source of light with a heart full of peace. His life became an inspiration that a person could completely transform, walk the path of truth with sincerity, and leave the world with full faith, carrying the light they had found to be passed on to others. The mosque, his students, and the Quran he had always cherished became an invisible yet eternal legacy, continuing the path he had walked for generations to come. Thank you for following this inspiring story until the end. Remember, the story you've heard is not real but a fictional tale created to inspire the journey of seeking truth and inner peace. If you feel inspired, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss other inspiring stories on this channel. See you in the next video, and may every story we share bring a little light and motivation to your days.